and this business is really hard. And now mom's dead. Now this baby's born, and she's got, my youngest, 3 holes in her heart.
Right.
Trisomy 21, which is Down syndrome.
Right.
I have people stealing from me in my company, I think. Certainly time, possibly money.
Right.
It was November 8th of 2017. I turned to my wife. I'm in the bathroom. I'm sitting here. I'm 190 pounds.
Right.
I was 160.
Right.
Maybe 165, soaking wet. And I turned to her and I said, I can't do this anymore. I went to a holistic doctor a few months prior, and I explained to him what was going on in my life. And he says, well, what has helped you out in the past when you've been super anxious and all this stuff? Because, Jimmy, it was a lot. Like, there was a lot going on in my world. Like, these are not excuses. This is just what life had handed me.
No, absolutely.
And basically, I left that appointment, not with a medical marijuana card, just with a permission to use that substance.
Yeah.
And my wife said that was the worst day of her life. So she was beautiful in the way that she let me almost go through that, but my decisions got more reckless, more worse. Everything picked up.
Right.
People are at work saying, yo, what's up with Rob? Like, calling my wife, like, dude, is he okay? Something's off here. And on that morning, that November 8th of 2017, I finally had enough. And she was like, basically, thank God she sprung into action. She knew this was kind of coming. She was either going to leave. She said something to trigger me, and it was about money.
Right.
And my mom had just passed before that. I had snow boots on, I remember, and I put my foot through a glass coffee table that was my mother's. That was like one of the only things that, and I left that night, and I went to my first 12-step meeting. I'm on the edge of that volcano.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it was almost like a force greater than myself was pushing me to it. And then there's another force that was coming in, like men like yourself, that were like, hey, dude, you see that edge? Like, why don't you come back a little bit?
Right. Here we are dancing on a volcano yet again with Rob Coldwell, a very close friend of mine and a person that I love tremendously. I'm getting a signal here that is 1, 2, 3. What is that?
Episode 3, baby.
Oh, that's right. Episode 3. There we go. Okay. So, we've just started really booking this thing. So, we are the new podcast, right, on the block. So it's my understanding that there are, in fact, millions of them. So our intent is certainly not to garner attention. If we get some, fantastic. If nobody sees it but us and our friends, that's great too, right? You know what I mean? Like, but the content lives on for the sake of archival purposes. So one thing I found that has struck me as funny is, we buried my father in 2007, and somewhere along the line, the voice messages on my cell phone disappeared or went away. And as a gift to my mother this last year, over the last 2 years, we signed her up with a video service where she could send in all the archives and have it digitized. And certainly the most valuable thing of that is the voice of my father.
Sure.
Right. You know what I mean? Like, so, a lot of this, and frankly, some of this, like these recent episodes I've shared with family that didn't really understand the depth of my past history, which has kind of opened up some transparency about some things that maybe some people weren't aware of about me. And I was a little fearful of it, but it's been liberating. Right. I remember in Game of Thrones, there was something that said that when everybody knows your secret, it can no longer be used against you.
Got it.
Right. And there's a liberating sensation about that, there are some people in my life who, there's a certain sense of beauty in people that love you actually being able to see you for who you are versus the avatar that they imagine you are. Mm-hmm. And some of that has come from this. So like I said, in the end, if this ends up something that as your children get older, they refer back to about you or your history or where you went or your journey or your story, That's wonderful. And if we get nothing more than just a fun conversation and some enjoyment out of this conversation, we win. We already won. We're here, right? We're survivors.
Here we are.
So here with Rob Coldwell. Rob and I have known each other for what, about maybe 5-6 years, I'm thinking, about. Right? We met in I believe we met in a church basement.
We did.
Right? So
Norwood, I think.
Yes, fantastic. Yeah. Right. We met in Norwood, Pennsylvania. We share some similarity in our background stories and some similarity in our process and where we are now, and lots of different similarities and differences. And I'm honored and privileged to know you, and I'm thankful that you would take your time to come out here to have this conversation. So now let's talk a little bit about background. So. You're originally from Pennsylvania, right?
I grew up in Delaware County.
Delaware County? Okay.
Born in Lansdowne.
Okay. Oh, you're a Lansdowne guy. Oh, okay. Okay. So in the beginning, right? So you went to high school, what, Upper Darby?
I went to Upper Darby High School.
Oh, okay.
Class of 2000.
Okay. That's... that school has a lot of good things going on for it, but can be a little dicey and a little rough. What was your experience there?
Yeah, I mean, you start with close to 1,000 kids in the freshman class, and I think a little over half of them graduated.
Whew. Wow.
Yeah, it was interesting. Much different than where my children go to school.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. We give them the benefits that maybe we didn't have. We'll talk about that a little bit too.
It's a great experience. I loved going Upper Darby.
You did? Okay.
I did. Yeah.
So, difficult family upbringing. Like, what was your relationship with your family like?
Yeah, it's good to reflect on it going back. That it was difficult in the sense that fun was not it didn't seem like fun was a priority for my family. It was more like survival. It felt more driven by fear. Could have just been me, but definitely the environment. Mom was sick a lot.
Okay.
Dad was self-employed.
Okay.
So early age, my programming was, well, do not be self-employed because they're really stressed out and this isn't fun.
Right, right.
And that's what I remember about childhood. But loving environment. I was probably the most dramatic and angry in the house.
I can't see that about you, man.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So what did your father do?
Yeah, he was a self-employed wedding photographer that morphed into a commercial photographer. So like Tasty Cake was a client. So my first job was working in his studio in his darkroom. In the basement of like the intersection of Garrett Road and Beaumont and Drexel Hill across from Brothers Pizza. He had a photography studio there.
Now, so you said he started out in wedding photography and then it morphed into commercial.
Yep.
Did that happen like later on in his career, or did you grow up more with seeing wedding photography, or did you grow up more seeing corporate type stuff?
It was phasing out. The wedding photography was phasing out. He did try to scale it up. I think he could do a couple dozen weddings in a month, leveraging some other photographers. And then as soon as one guy couldn't show up, the system just went off the rails. Right. So, and he was not able to handle that stress. So he went to more, like if you go to mainline health facilities, he'll do the doctors and he'll set up really good, like he would come into your office and do like a really cool image of your studio here and your staff and then that gets mounted and put on the wall. So that's what he ended his career with.
He was pre-video, right? So it was all, because 2000-ish, we were just kind of transitioning out of, you know what I mean? Like if you had a camera, it was like a giant thing that you were carrying on your shoulder, and fidelity wasn't very good, but 35 millimeter was crisp and sharp.
That's right. Yeah, the technology kept evolving.
Right.
Like we were literally making prints, like 2,000 black and white images of a crimpet. Right. Was like a job that I remember being on, the fixer, the toner, the developer. But he would listen to Dr. Wayne Dyer. Okay. In his darkroom. Okay. So you can't even see anything depending on what phase he is in the development of that film. Right. So at a very early age, I was being programmed in a healthy way with the words of Dr. Wayne Dyer, who I
Right.
really respect and admire and rest his soul.
Another one of the foundation inspirations for success. And I mean, my familiarity with Wayne Dyer is limited. I am familiar, but not at that level. So we'll come back to that because I do find that some of those early influences tend to fold back into who we ultimately become later. So here you are working at your father's studio, developing, right?
Yep.
Seeing the stress associated with business. And we'll go on record as saying that you are in business for yourself and do quite well. And we'll double back to that later. But so here you are in high school. And so you did you go to Penn State? Where was it? Yeah, you were at Penn State.
Yeah, one clarification was the stress for my father. He was able to pivot his business from the wedding photography to more like the commercial accounts. The
Right.
stress came from mom getting sick. So being that he was self-employed and all of our grandparents had passed away, when mom got sick multiple times with cancer, you don't have a choice but to get her to chemo, right?
Right.
So the stress of the environment came from being self-employed combined with an ill wife. That was like the impactful moment for me. That was like that subconsciously was a combination of don't be self-employed, and if you don't have money, you won't be safe. That was the programming. And yet, yes, I did go to Penn State, and the third time my mom had cancer was when I was in college.
Okay.
And my dad retired shortly after that time. He was a saver. They were both very good savers,
Right.
which boded well for them. Could never get them into real estate, which is what I do, but that's okay.
Right. So, so what kind of cancer did your mother have?
She had breast cancer like multiple times.
Right.
Multiple times.
Is she still with us? Or?
She died 8 years ago. She died 4 days before my daughter Faith was born in the same hospital. Yep. And we had a tea party there. It was actually it was kind of one of those things like mom's been exhausted and sick for so long, like kind of let this be over with. And I think she was at peace. We all made peace, and we did a tea party in like kind of the ICU with all 3 out of my 4 kids because Faith wasn't born yet. And it was a really special experience. Yeah.
Your father's still with us?
Father's around. Yep.
Yeah.
Bob Coldwell's around, retired. Hershey's Mill to Florida in between the seasons. And
Are you close?
we're getting closer, actually, Jimmy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we're getting closer. So Friday we'll have lunch together. We'll do lunch once a month.
Do you think there was a reason why you're transitioning to being closer versus not as close when you were younger? I mean, what do you think were the barriers associated with maybe not being as close when you were younger?
Barriers would be, I am very different than my family. Very different than my mother, my sister, who's older, and my dad. Definitely more of an entrepreneurial spirit that can come out. My dad used to say, Rob, you're either going to Yale or jail. And I say I got it in between because I went to Penn State.
Yeah, right. Well, it's
and almost ended up in jail there. So
we're going to come back to that too, for sure.
So yeah, I think it was probably a lack of respect that I had, expectations that I had, just this angst, misdirected, and my dad saying, you know, I'm just going to give this kid some space once I got off to school.
Right.
And then he did help me with one of my first real estate projects, and I was a total a-hole, dude. Like I was not very appreciative.
Really?
Of his help. And kind of
was he the type
all.
of person that sage wisdom, gave good advice, but you didn't want to hear it because you knew too much? Because I know that was my experience with my pop.
My dad's pretty quiet. My dad didn't talk until he was 4 or 5. And his father put a camera in his hands. And that's when my dad took on photography. So my dad wouldn't socialize, but he would go to the football game to take pictures. So that was his lens literally into the world. He's just a different individual. He's a different cat. Beautiful
Right.
man.
Right.
Really, really respect him and admire him today. Like, for instance, I'm very kind to any type of wait staff or like I went golfing yesterday.
Right.
I didn't know the head pro's name, which is fine.
Right.
I could have introduced myself as well. I knew the guy who was like moving all the bags around, Sean, and just like, hey. So my dad was always like that. He was always just very kind because he was the worker, right? If he went to the wedding, some weddings would get a meal for him.
Right.
Others, you're on your own. What are you doing out here with us?
Right.
And that always fascinated me, and I saw that. And that's a bias that you can have at an early age. I mean, biases are tricky, but that was yeah. No, I have a lot of respect for him. I'm glad that we talk more now than at different seasons of life. And
What part of Florida is he in?
he's over on the Atlantic side.
Oh, okay.
I think he's near Melbourne. I haven't visited him yet there. He bought one of those Airstream campers.
Okay.
So
Okay.
he's down in an Airstream for about, I think, 4
Did
or
you have
5
any real
months.
estate advice for him about whether or not to get an Airstream camper?
No, he did not ask me. He did not ask me.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you know what? Like people being themselves, and pioneering their own path, As I got older, I realized the wisdom of my father, maybe just a few years before he was gone and then long after he was gone.
Yeah.
But sad how we realize those things later on in life and we squander all the guidance, positive guidance that we did get. But it's interesting how your father was learned to see things through a visual lens because communication wasn't his strong suit. That's kind of interesting. And communication is your strong suit. So I understand why you say that you're different.
Yep,
You know what I
we're
mean? In
different.
that way. Now, was your mother a communicator too, or was she more like your father?
Looking back, very loving. The challenge with my mom, her upbringing was absolutely traumatic. So my grandfather, whom I've never met any of my grandparents, they all
Right.
passed away before I was born, but he came literally off the boat from Italy,
Okay.
left here, and then
Okay.
his parents went back at like 4 or 5.
Okay. Wow.
So, and he had it rough. I've actually since made peace with his name is Alfonso. I went to his grave. He has the same grave as an uncle and my mother, and like my grandfather buried one kid
Okay.
early in life, and it was rough. He was an alcoholic,
Right.
and that made my mother and my dad, they steered away from any type of like
Right.
that, drugs or alcohol.
Right.
But it was a rougher upbringing. So my mom was just fearful. If I was going to take a trip, I was a part of a mastermind for a while, and we would do like we'd go to Austria for
Right.
10 days.
Right.
We did the Inca Trail together. If I let mom know about that too soon, I had to be careful because she'd say, "Did you get your shot? Are you sure you want to go on the trip, Robbie?"
Right,
every conversation was a bit on repeat.
Right.
So, but there was very loving, and I'm blessed that my wife got to meet my
Right.
mom, and she keeps a lot of some similar traditions that we grew up with, and yeah. But my mom was the glue, Jimmy.
Right. You've got to wonder. I have a similar relationship with my mother, and I think for some odd reason, I heard the lyrics from Pink Floyd's "The Wall" album. "Mama's going to help you build the wall." You know what I mean? That mothers, with all the best of intent and being the glue, can also simultaneously build like an isolationist relationship with their children, where they just want to protect them and they just want to help them. And then what ends up happening is that as we navigate our way into really complex and difficult lives, we're maybe more emotionally ill-equipped than we would have ordinarily been otherwise. You've got to wonder whether in some ways that, could, be one of the foundational seeds that lead to addiction, as well as generational seeds that come from, like you, my background, my grandfather did not drink, right? My mother's father didn't. His father froze to death drunk in a basement. So, my mother's father, my father's father, I should say, drank and, sold as I recall, my dad's orthopedic shoes when he was small. And it came down to my grandmother was either like shape up or ship out. and he shaped up. Now, my father was type 1 diabetic. So, and found that out in his early 20s. He was maybe Dean's age when he found out. So he really, he might have gone down that path, but physically he couldn't. So it manifested itself in food. And he was a very, very big man. And it was poisoning him.
Yep.
But it's addiction, being generationally, prevalent. They talk about, nurture versus nature, right? And you have to wonder how much of that is genetically predisposed, and how much of that is directly based on the experiences that we have and the way we're brought up. I came to find out recently that my mother had experienced a very, very traumatic event in her younger years. We won't go into it on tape, but and came to realize that, at least in part, that maybe that's what some of the cause was for, the isolationist and protectionist position in terms of the way she protected me, which was wonderful, frankly. I grew up great like you did. But also whether, some of that was genetically predisposed based on stress. They're coming to find out now that some of, that there's some genetic influence that happens with, the way, our progeny are born, and some of, that actual nature influence in, in the way, we genetically predispose our kin. And I don't know what the source is. Mm-hmm. All I know is that I was born with a discomfort, right? You know what I mean? That feeling of, not quite fitting, you know what I mean? Like, not quite feeling as though I was part of, maybe, my description would be ostracized a little bit more than what yours was, with your history at school or whatever. But so you're in college, right? You know what I mean? Now
I made it to college.
You made it to college.
I did.
Right.
Yep.
So it wasn't a path to prison, right? So, and you studied finance, right? Wasn't that right?
Finance with a concentration in real estate.
Right.
Yeah.
So, now what was it that enticed you to think about real estate at that age? Because I know a lot of people, when they're in their 20s, the paths that they choose aren't necessarily the paths that they lead. You're talking to an art student, right? So, and although that manifests itself in things like this, that's the way these things happen.
Creation.
Yeah, sure. Creation. So what was it that you saw in real estate, or what was it that enticed you to say, hey, you know what I mean? Like, this is something I want to pursue. Mm-hmm. Was there something that you saw?
So I had that subconscious programming that, if you don't have money, you won't be safe, and don't be self-employed. That was subconscious. I've since unraveled that to understand, okay, that's where I was making certain decisions. And then one of my mentors was my mother's brother, so my Uncle Chaz, and he would, every so often, he would give me like a Think and Grow Rich book, a Rich Dad, Poor
Love
Dad.
Napoleon Hill, man, that's my shit.
So,
yeah, okay.
So Rich Dad, Poor Dad made it pretty clear. Plus, from 2000 to the run up of the Great Recession, lots was in the news about the benefits of real estate.
Right.
So when I got out of school, I had already had a full-time job, and I was
doing what?
I was the CEO in training for a company called Swiss Farms, which, if you're not from Delaware County and all that, you don't know what Swiss Farms is.
I know what Swiss Farms is.
I was the CEO in training of the Swiss Farm stores.
Okay.
We could do a 3-hour podcast on drive-through grocery stores. I don't know if anybody would probably put them to sleep, but that was so I was interested in real estate. You could own the real estate. You could own the businesses. I learned that a big part of McDonald's is owning the real estate.
Yeah.
Right. So it just made sense to me. I was also very good with my hands. I was also paying for my first year of college.
Okay.
So I had developed a landscaping business, really more so grass cutting. Sold it my senior year summer to a neighbor down the street with all the accounts and the equipment and all. And it was highly profitable, low overhead. I did most of the work, 1 or 2 employees, part-time. But I was paying for it. So one of the reasons I chose finance is because you had to have a certain GPA to get into finance, 3.5. And I said, well, if I'm paying for this thing, I better, do it.
Right.
And real estate just was making sense to me, and it was making more sense to me the more classes I took. And I'm blessed for I understand it. I don't understand about the stock market. I don't understand about some other industries, but real estate is something that I can make my craft for a lifetime.
Right.
And that's what I do.
So I'm assuming that you chose, because of choosing the path of finance, you had a propensity for strengths in math when you were in school,
Yep.
That was a kind of an easy thing for you? Because I've seen you.
Not language.
I've seen you. You're a
but good with
spreadsheet.
math.
You're a spreetsheet wizard. I've observed. I have observed. Right.
I won't turn down a good pivot table, Excel spreadsheet.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So, in college, graduate class of. What?
I graduated in 2000. It took me 4.5 years because I worked at the last year, full-time job.
Okay.
So I didn't even go to graduation, Jimmy. I was working full time,
right?
Commuting back and forth between Delaware County, Swiss Farms, and Happy Valley, Penn State for my last semester. I'd take classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Okay.
I'd be off on Wednesday, and Thursday night I would drive home and I would work shifts at both stores and corporate office at Swiss Farms. I was the milkman, literally.
Right.
I wanted to own 100. I was going to be an area developer.
Right.
Buy the land, develop the drive-through grocery stores, and I put everything into that for about 7 years. It didn't work out.
Right.
It gave me a really good background in franchising.
Didn't work out?
No, the Swiss Farm stores have not worked outside of Delaware County, unfortunately. But we ended up taking on private equity. We ended up franchising it. We opened up stores. I think I was on my way out as they were opening them. But in Chester County, we opened some stores, in New Jersey, and then I think as far south as North Carolina.
What do you think was undermining their ability to succeed in scaling?
Yeah, so it was at the end of the day not facing reality as to what the new locations were doing in terms of average ticket and customer counts, and living on hopium too much, living on some private equity money.
I got a new word for my mental Rolodex, hopium.
Hopium.
I'm adding that to living on hopium. Man.
Yeah. Yeah,
so not looking at data,
not
looking
really
at,
making data-driven decisions. Too much on, well, we're just going to redesign this store and it's going to work. But the cost of real estate was very expensive because you need locations. So that was a big pivot that I needed to do.
Let me ask a question. So part of I just got back from making, probably in the last month and a half, I've been back and forth to Virginia and Maryland and DC like a half a dozen different times. And you watch the transition from local businesses like Wawa to suddenly you're in 7-Eleven territory, or suddenly, what's the other one? Royal Farms, right? So I've often thought well, there's got to be some transitioning brand loyalty that happens at some point where it's a foreign brand, right? And my wife and I, on the way down in the car, she was like, we're no longer in Wawa country, she said, quote unquote. And it was disgusted with not being able to stop somewhere to get a cup of coffee at a place that I'm familiar with. And some of that, I think, has to do with quality. I think it's different from place to place. I certainly don't think that the quality level of places like 7-Eleven is similar to places like Wawa or, Royal Farms. But I also think that some of it is just familiarity with brand, right? And anytime you're scaling like that, you know what I mean? You're planning yourself in a new area, and now it's Swiss Farms has got to compete with the comfort of what's already there, and that's a challenge too.
Big challenge. Changing habits is expensive.
Right. A change in habits is expensive, right? So, all right, so you're transitioning out of, now let's go to, because you said that you alluded to some challenges that you went through when you were in college, like some difficulties. I'm assuming that perhaps some of those challenges had to do with navigating your way through a social life as well as, trying to be successful in school and otherwise? I mean, what was that like for you?
I got out of the gate pretty strong in college. I ended up in a fraternity house, and I just would party different than some of the other people in this house.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, though, I think it was
A party different? What do you mean?
Yeah, just kind of when they were settling down, I was getting ramped up. Right?
I understand that 100%.
Yeah.
I understand that 100%.
And then I think early on I would get some, at the beginning, I didn't even live at the fraternity house. Our sophomore year, my buddies and I who pledged this one fraternity house, which later got shut down and then it disbanded and then reorganized, and they redid the house.
Got shut
and all
down?
that. It did. It was shut down shortly after I graduated.
Okay.
They closed it. They gave it a break. They rebuilt the house, and then they relaunched the brand
Right.
of this fraternity,
Right.
if you will. So, where do you want to go there? I mean,
Well, there's a lot of different directions we can go. So I'm assuming that because, let's ask this then. So you're dealing with the challenges of being away, right, and trying to focus on school, right, and be successful at that, and at the same time navigate your way through the social scene and that type of thing. I mean, did you find your ability to be able to navigate your way through some of those challenges of maybe, imbibing more than those around you and still successfully be able to get done what you needed to get done? Or was it impacting school and otherwise, or relationships? I mean, what did you find?
I wouldn't call it unmanageable.
Okay.
I would say, looking back, I came from a big high school. A lot of us went to Penn State from Upper Darby.
Right.
And my social network didn't grow too much. I was kind of hanging out with the same guys I went to high school with.
Okay.
And in that regard, there were some limitations there. And then I was also a pretty good athlete in high school. I played golf.
You played golf,
and we had
yeah.
a good golf team.
Right. Right.
And I did not carry that over to college. My sport was more the partying. And now I'm not living at home anymore.
Right. There's no governance. There's no oversight.
40,000
Yes,
kids,
yes.
18 to 24, whatever Penn State, that Happy
Yes.
Valley is. So there was definitely some navigating. I
Right.
would say never fully unmanageable. And a light bulb went off for me my junior year.
Right.
And just drinking too much, and just kind of woke up one day and was like, most of these other guys in this fraternity house, one kid, his father owned a bank, another was an insurance executive. Like,
Right.
dude, they're going to be okay, man. They got a path like almost already laid out for them.
Right.
You don't, bro.
Right.
And a friend came up who used to cut grass with me.
Right.
In the landscaping business, and I asked him what he was doing, and he was still cutting some grass, and then he was working at the Swiss farm stores, and that's where I got locked in on the Swiss farms. So that year, every class I took, I had to make it more like real life. You see, because I was making money in high school. Jimmy, I bought my own car, I paid for my insurance.
Right.
Like, that was junior year.
Right.
So I went from this very independent, in some ways, high school lifestyle with
Right.
some money to now a broke college student, and I didn't like that.
Right. Right.
Living with these other guys in this fraternity house and all that. So I kind of cleaned up and got laser focused, and all my energy was about the Swiss farms.
Right.
Long story short, tried to get a job with them, didn't get hired, but I got a co-op at Wyeth Pharmaceuticals, and that's where I learned my Excel skills, my Microsoft Word. Like, they would train you for free.
Right.
And I also learned I am not fit out for a cubicle life.
Right.
And these larger organizations.
Right.
So then I ended up getting my job at Swiss Farms, and I worked there full time until my late 20s. But
Right.
Yeah.
So what was that where did you transition next from Swiss Farms? Like where did you, coming out of Swiss Farms, where you did the pharmaceutical thing for a minute, and what did that lead to?
Yeah.
Like
So Swiss Farms, as I saw that it was kind of like the Titanic, and they're all spending time like moving the deck chairs around, right? And I'm looking at real numbers, and like, oh my God, my wife and I just had our first child, and
Right.
this is real,
Right.
And we had bought a house.
Right. Now, where did you meet your wife? You met her at Penn State?
We met her at Swiss Farms.
Oh, you
She
met her
was
at
a
Swiss Farms.
customer.
Oh, okay.
I was the milkman. I was
Okay,
the
good.
coffee guy.
Oh, yeah, man. I'm
So
telling
we-
you, got to
we-
go on.
we-
You're the
we
milkman,
met. I was the
baby.
milkman.
And I've
That's
seen,
right.
You know what? Like, I look at it, you knew these days.
I knew.
You know what I'm saying? You got skills I didn't know
Yes,
about. You're the
yes.
milkman. You know what I
Yep.
mean? So
We've been together 20 years.
fantastic. That's fantastic. And you have 4 children,
We have
right?
4 children.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I wanted a business that would do 5 things. And it was most of which the opposite of Swiss Farms. That was retail. I wanted to be in service.
Right.
I wanted a certain amount of EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes. Like, it needed to be a business that made money.
Right. Right. Okay.
And I wanted something that was not completely outsourced. Because I would have friends that were engineers, and like they're competing with India to who's going to design the next stadium and labor
Right.
and all
Right.
that. That was just like starting to be a thing.
Right.
And nothing against India or any of that. It's just I want something that I can like put my hands on. And
Right.
long story short, it was either going to be, and plus I got my designation in this franchise, certified franchise executive.
Yeah. What's that all about?
Yeah, you take enough classes, you can learn about franchising. Franchising is a phenomenal way to scale a good business.
Right.
It's not for every business. It's not for every operator. But I like the franchising route as a way
Right.
to scale. And I would fly out to Vegas multiple times a year and
Okay.
set up a booth for Swiss Farms, because we figured if you own some Roy Rogers land or some Boston Markets or whatever, like, hey, put one of these Swiss Farms in your parking lot.
Right. Right.
And that was what our thinking was. It was good thinking. And when I was there, I was looking for the next. I knew that this was the Titanic, and they're spending
You
time
already
on the
knew.
deck
Yeah,
chairs.
right.
I knew.
Right. Right.
Therefore, I made a list, and I did very scientifically, was either going to open up a hair franchise, because when you lose your job, one of the other criteria was what's called a beta of 0. Walmart is a beta of 0.
Say more.
It doesn't do phenomenal in a recession, and it doesn't do phenomenal when it's like really good at it. It's kind of always steady Eddie. Right.
Okay.
In fact, it does well in a recession because a lot of people will trade down, right, to get more value. Whereas a jewelry store will not do as well. Not because the people that are shopping there can't afford it. It doesn't look good when you're in a recession and you're buying the stuff that the average person.
Right.
Yeah, it just doesn't look good. So you kind of everybody tightens up. So I didn't want that. So when you lose your job, you'll still get your hair cut.
Right.
So the hair cutteries of the world, that checked a lot of boxes for me, but I just couldn't see myself owning. And I know a man still to this day, I think he owns maybe 50 hair cutteries or Supercuts, one of those brands. The other was becoming franchise was property management. And as I bought my first rental in 2006, so as soon as I basically graduated from college, I bought a property in Westchester. And so I thought that I knew how to be a landlord. And the property management was intriguing to me because that was the service sector of the real estate space. It was the only sector that would do well regardless of the economy. When when it gets tougher to collect rent, more people will go hire a property manager than when it's easy. So I settled on that space, Jimmy, and I spent the next year traveling around the country, meeting with the different franchisors, those that own these brands that were paying to be at these shows. To learn about their business model.
Right, right. So how does this end up? Transitioning into your brand? Because, so now you're seeing property management as being well, I'm starting to see some other things too that maybe I didn't understand, but I see some similarities, and one of those similarities is how foundational entrepreneurship can come from fear.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like. Fear from not having, and strangely enough, I didn't grow up in a lifestyle or a family where I needed for anything. Like I wanted for some things, you know what I mean? But didn't need for anything. My father worked for Merck,
Got him.
You know, he was a biotech that worked in a lab, and he was a fire chief, you know, and he had a hypnosis practice with my mom in Lafayette Hill. So they had all these different things that they did, you know what I mean? And it was because he's trying to fit 3 lives into one, because they told him at, you know, 24, I think it was, when he found out he was type 1, they basically were like, listen, you know, your lifespan, you know, so it was almost like he was fitting 3 lives into one, you know what I mean? So when people used to ask me like what my pop did, it was like, you know what I mean? It was like, how much time do you have, right? But you know, part of it was ego. Like, you know, I started reading Think and Grow Rich too. And, you know, and I wasn't from the poor part of town, but I certainly wasn't on the rich side of the tracks. Like rich was where I grew up was Lafayette Hill, right? You know what I mean? It was White Marsh Township. And I was like in the nicer section of Conshohocken, but you didn't have to walk that many, you know, blocks down the street till, you know, you had to start looking over your shoulder because you were going to get hit with a brick or beat up. You know what I mean? Like that was just the transition. So I think to myself, like, okay, so fear is definitely a driver, right? But you also had, what I find at least compelling in some way is that you had your experience with your landscape business, which kind of indicates that, you know, there's a portion of maintenance that has to do with a small percentage or a sliver of property management, but property maintenance, and how that kind of all folds into, okay, well, that's a confidence builder, right? You know what I mean? It's not like you have to figure it all out. You know, here's a section that I had success and got rid of, right? You know what I mean? When I went to school, you know what I mean? Like, do you think some of that led to some confidence to maybe property management side? Like my experience with what I did when I was still in high school and making money leads itself to property management and, you know, and moving down that path. Do you think that kind of connected in some way for you?
Yeah, it did. Maybe I can find it one day, but I wrote in a notebook, like Transformation Services is what it was, like more of like a general contracting type of a business that I was considering. Because see, I'd hang out and I had more in common with more the blue collar guys,
Right.
but I got the grades and was more from the family of like how important school is of the white collar.
Right.
If that makes sense, right?
It does, 100%.
So I was like, well, I can bridge these two worlds.
Right.
And I've successfully been able to do that. It took 15 years.
Right.
And that, everything, like what you go, I think I forget what Dalai Lama or somebody said, everything you go through, you know, you grow through.
Right.
And that whole, you know, no mud, no lotus.
Right.
And so looking back, it all makes sense.
Right.
And you mentioned fear. I mean, fear drove every decision until I found 12 steps. Right. It was literally the fuel.
Right.
And it worked pretty successfully for a while.
Me too.
Until
100%.
in some ways it did. Mm-hmm. And then it doesn't. And then it's like that oh shit moment.
Right.
And my adrenals are like burned out. Like that was for me, it was like I'm 43. So that was like mid-30s.
Right.
And I'm burned out.
Right.
And this business is really hard. And now mom's dead. Now this baby's born. And she's got, my youngest, 3 holes in her heart.
Right.
Trisomy 21, which is Down syndrome.
Right.
I have people stealing from me in my company, I think. Certainly time, possibly money.
Right.
I had like 6 or 7 rent wells around the country.
Right.
In 5 states. We scaled it up way too fast. And it's this oh shit moment.
There's the gift of desperation. I see a volcano over there. There you go.
Yeah, we're getting to the desperation, right? Yeah, we're getting to the...
See us walking up the side of the...
Yeah. Yeah, I respect the hell out of that thing.
Right. Okay, there you go. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I felt it get a little warmer, you know what I mean? And that's, so... well, let's trudge down that path a little bit, you know what I mean? Because like you... I went through well, first of all, fear drove me. Still, from time to time, still does. Yeah. And I'm also in agreement that fear isn't necessarily a bad thing because it led me to plan, prepare, lay the groundwork for.
We need fear as a species.
Yes, without question.
Right. Like it's yeah.
But what ends up happening is that it becomes an unhealthy manifestation. Right? It just grinds. And for me, my mouth started writing checks my ass couldn't cash, right? Just in terms of how many things that I was willing to try and do. And I mean, you know what? Like, in the interest of transparency, failing forward big time, all the time, right? You know what I mean? Like, sometimes I tell people the only reason why I succeed is because there were no more ways to fail. And maybe that's, an exaggeration of the truth. I had some successes up in the mix of there, but, so you and I met. So had you been in 12 steps and out in recovery and out of recovery a couple times over time? Like, when did you first arrive in a church basement?
Yeah.
Where did you first?
So let me back up where I found recovery. So
okay.
I think it was like maybe sophomore year of high school.
Okay. Wow.
Was when I found my drug of choice, which is marijuana. Yeah. And some people don't consider it a drug. I probably passed 3 dispensaries coming here.
Yes. Well, I just had this conversation earlier today with another guy in recovery about the fact that it's not a gateway, it's a trapdoor.
Okay. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I could see that. So that was like the best thing ever for my, however old I was, 16 or 15. And like, oh my gosh, this got this thinking mind to calm down.
Right.
And I loved it.
Right.
I loved it. And I was never really into the alcohol thing. Like, it would hurt my stomach and give me a headache and that. Right. Like a little bit of weed here and there would never, like, it was my friend.
Right.
And then I got caught in high school.
Right.
And then I had to, like, my parents were really strict. Right. And I had to put it down.
Right.
Then I moved out and went to Penn State, picked it back up.
Right.
And then I got to that moment in the fraternity house where I just had this like satori moment, this awakening moment to be like, dude, you're not on. My dad would always say, you're not on the right path.
Right.
He'd never tell me how to get back on the path. He'd just tell me I was not on the path.
Do you think he knew the magnitude of your using or any of those things?
They may have even thought it was worse.
Right.
I'm not quite sure. I've never really pressed him on it. But to 2 people who grew up with alcoholics, it was an extreme and like like they didn't do anything. I drank my parents' vodka early.
Right.
And they didn't know for years, and they were still serving it because I filled it back up with water. And my parents' friends didn't have the heart to tell them.
Yes. Me too.
Right? You did that one.
Hey, Mom, if you're watching this, Dad, Dad isn't gone anymore, but you know what I mean? So, sorry you shook drinks for your friends with with some Schuylkill punch in it. Sorry for that.
So that was the release. Yeah. So it was off and on.
Okay.
And then I white-knuckled life. That's what my dad would call driving on like the New Jersey Turnpike, right? And there's just a lot of traffic. So I put down all of those types of substances, the alcohol and the marijuana, and did the business and focused in on the business. Right. And the business became almost like the drug, if you will.
Yeah, 100%.
And just after it, just burning out my adrenals, not taking time off, like doubling down, make some money, get it bigger, make some money, get it bigger, hire some more staff, hire like maniac crazy stuff, which you need that energy in a way. At least I thought I did, or I didn't even know any better because the whole time I'm unconscious to this, Jimmy. I'm just, this is what I need to do literally for survival.
Right.
And then life becomes more than what I can handle.
Right.
And
it's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable.
Right.
I'm unhealthy. And then these multitude of things happen, and I'm hanging out with a buddy, and I knew that he smoked weed. Mm-hmm. And I asked, hey, man, you got any of that too? I need to take a break, dude. I just need to give this mind a break. Mm-hmm. And a little voice in my head said, this is not going to end well. Mm-hmm. Now, I had been out of that game for a while. He didn't hand me like a bud. He handed me a pen. I had never seen one before, Jimmy.
Right.
Didn't even know they were a thing.
Right.
And I was off to the races.
Uh-huh.
I was off to the races.
Yeah.
And at first it was just to take the proverbial edge off.
Right.
And hang out with the kids. Like take this, or like take out the Sunday evening jitters before
Right.
Monday.
Right.
And it worked again, which that was the scary part. It worked. And then it got to the point, very quickly, it progressed to, I'm waking up in the middle of the night. Where's that pen at? I'm almost out of my pen. Where am I going to go get another pen?
Yeah. Right.
Right? Not telling anybody about this.
Right.
This is not a social thing
Right.
in a way. And I knew some people, and I still know them, and they can do that in moderation. And they
Right.
can handle that, or so they say.
Right.
And that wasn't me.
Right.
So I don't know how long that period of time was,
Right.
but thankfully, it was November 8th of 2017. I turned to my wife. I'm in the bathroom. I'm sitting here. I'm 190 pounds.
Right.
I was 160,
Right.
maybe 165, soaking wet. And I turned to her and I said, I can't do this anymore. I had never.
Did she
One
know?
part of the story.
Did she know about the pen and the whole, or
I went to a holistic doctor a
Right.
few months prior, and I explained to him what was going on in my life.
right?
And he says, well, what has helped you out in the past when you've been super anxious and all this stuff? Because, Jimmy, it was a lot. Like, there was
Right.
a lot going on in my world. Like,
Right.
these are not excuses. This is just what life had handed me.
No, absolutely.
And basically, I left that appointment, not with a medical marijuana card, just with a permission to use that
Yeah.
substance.
Yeah.
And my wife said that was the worst day of her life. So she was beautiful in the way that she let me almost go through that, but my decisions got more reckless, more worse. Everything picked up.
Right.
People are at work saying, yo, what's up with Rob? Like, calling my wife, like, dude, is he okay? Something's off here. And on that morning, that November 8th of 2017, I finally had enough. And she was like, basically, thank God she sprung into action. She knew this was kind of coming. She was either going to leave
Right.
or I had to,
Right,
hit
do
my rock
something.
bottom,
Right.
which I probably already hit my rock bottom, but I'm scraping. That's the shitty part about the rock bottom. You don't just bounce back up. You drag.
Drag.
I can laugh about it now because that was probably the best, looking back, genuinely the best day of my life, to
Right.
just admit that I had a problem.
Right.
Have no idea what the solution's going to be, but then it wasn't an intervention in a way because I asked for it, but they
Right.
did have some counselors that evening, my wife
Right.
and her best friend, who meanwhile is coaching her up this whole time for weeks leading up to this. And he mentioned about 12 steps, but it was not like, here's a meeting list. So I had never really know what they were, Jimmy. I had never been exposed to it much because my parents weren't around it. And they were like, so whatever reason, like they just, it was just, I mean, you go to Penn State, most everybody's partying there.
Everybody. Yeah. Yeah. You're the rare exception if you're not.
You're the rare exception if you're not. There were some kids on my dorm hall at Pinchot that I didn't understand how they were like, I would get home obliterated and they were playing chess and I didn't understand it and whatever. So, no, I wish that whatever, like that's how it landed for me. I was mid-30s.
Right.
And then I didn't know what to do. I was just going to get like counselor by this guy, I guess. Like that's what it was. I lasted about 2 days.
Right.
And my wife said something, and it was the wintertime. I think it was snowing out. She said something to trigger me, and it was about money.
Right.
And my mom had just passed before that. I had snow boots on, I remember, and I put my foot through a glass coffee table that was my mother's. That was like one of the only things that, And I left that night, and I went to my first 12-step meeting.
That's around the time I met you.
Yes.
I remember sitting next to you, and I remember the look in your eyes. I remember, you know what I mean? Like sometimes you remember, you remember vignettes of people, right? And I remember sitting in Norwood next to you for the first time, and there was a wrestling match going on between your ears. I could see it.
Yes.
And
did I have the notepad? I was bringing a notepad.
yes, you were. You were taking
and
notes.
I was trying to make it was so noisy up there.
Yes.
Writing would actually help trigger and get what are they saying here, because I'm on the edge of that volcano.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it was almost like a force greater than myself was pushing me to it. And then there's another force that was coming in, like men like yourself,
Right.
that were like, hey, dude, you see that edge? Like, why don't you come back a little bit?
Right.
Why don't you just keep
I remember
coming
those
back?
initial conversations you and I had. And, you know, and the beautiful thing about arriving in recovery is the diversity. Right. And the
Yes.
challenge that, you know, sometimes the challenge is the strength, but it requires you to stay in position long enough for there to be, like we talk about, like when we arrive, you know, anonymity is our strength. Like, you know, there's, you know, no big shots, no little shots, one shot, we're all fucking shot. Right. And that's really the truth. But on the other side, sharing commonality with our experiences and what we do and, you know, what we're into or where we come from, you know what I mean? Like, guys who spend a lot of time in a prison yard, right? Mm-hmm. Like they will relate to me on the gift of desperation, but on the journey, maybe not so much. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm alleged with people that come from all walks of life and all backgrounds, and we haven't necessarily walked the same path, but there's a, you know, kind of a circle within a circle. And those are people that are kind of on the outside trying to do some, you know, maybe loftier aspirations or, you know, bigger goals, or, you know, bearing the responsibility for more than themselves. And, you know, when you mix family and business and all those things, you know, as my therapist at the VA would say at the time when I first started seeing him, he had 32 years, he would say, as addicts, we try to bear the responsibility of the weight of the world on our shoulders.
Yeah.
Right. And, you know, so, you know, I knew that when I first put you on my phone, you were Rob Conservative before I knew who you were.
Okay.
Right. Because you showed up with a dress shirt and a notepad. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? And I was like, okay, okay, here you're jotting his notes or whatever. Yeah. But, you know, dress shirt, notepad, gift of desperation, relatable eyes, and you and I clicked. Yeah. Now, you know, there's a point in those early stages where, at least for me, you know, I waded in, but I put a toe at a time. Like I didn't stick my whole foot in. Okay. Like I stayed clean, right? But it took time. You have to keep coming back. And it took time for me to realize that I was in a place of safety.
Wow, right.
Right? You know what I mean? And
did it actually take time to recognize you were in a place of safety?
Yes, I think to a point. I mean, there was what do they call it? It's a, you know, an atmosphere of recovery, right? You know what I mean? So there was that, and there were people friendly, right? Mm-hmm. But to know that, you know, when you have low self-esteem and low self-worth and an ego all combined and shaken together and shaken not stirred or whatever, and you walk into a meeting, right? You're caught between, on one end, like, why are these people being nice to me and friendly to me? And you're all doing it wrong. I just got here and I don't know what right is, but I don't know what y'all are doing, and that's not right either. And, you know, I remember early on thinking that, I mean, I must have been in recovery a month and thinking to myself, like, dude, why are we not sponsored by Wawa? Because think about how many people would show up if there was free breakfast here. Like, I should go talk to them about an endorsement. You know, you know what I mean? Like, you don't really understand the magnitude of what's going on, and it took time for me to really realize there were people that were interested in me and wanted to help me in my recovery, mm-hmm. but it took time for me to, like, really slowly let my guard down, mm-hmm. you know, to the point that, you know, that I am in a safe place. And it also took relationships like the one you and I have, where I could see additional commonality in backgrounds. Like, mm-hmm. you know what I mean? Like I sat on every seat in the Titanic from the engine room to the bridge. I mean, I tried them all. But
what does that mean?
It means that I had tried so many different. I had tried substituting one substance for another, one experience for another, one escape for another, one fantasy for another, over and over again. You know, ultimately to be left with the discomfort, which was me. Mm-hmm. Really, it had anything to do with a substance or an escape. It had to do with a deeper problem, which was a dis-ease that I felt internally. Right. And, and seeing it in other people is important, right? Regardless of what your background is, whether you're LGBTQ and, you know what I mean? And you spend time in prison or, you know what I mean? But when you can see somebody that, that has some similarity, you know what I mean? Like I might not have looked as, I might not have been Jimmy conservative, but I was probably a little bit more Jimmy conservative than some of the other people in the room, right? And my background was such in a way that, I had interest in some other things too, business-wise and otherwise. So, and I think sometimes, you need to stand shoulder to shoulder with people that you can relate to out there a little bit too, you know what I mean, out in the world.
Yes.
And when I saw you, I was like, he's one of us, but he's also one of us, if that makes sense. Yeah. And you were one of those guys. I was like, he's one of us, but he's also one of us. Yep. And I needed that. You know what I mean? My sponsor, owned one of the largest trading firms in the Philly Stock Exchange. You know what I mean? Like he was, you know what I mean? And that was one of the things that, I liked his confident humility. I liked, a little bit of his bravado. You know what I mean? He had a little sizzle and sauce to the way he talked and the way he carried himself. And I wanted that. But I also, in the end, I wanted to emulate others who had what I wanted. And I wanted to surround myself with others. I don't, you know what I mean? I didn't want to go work a counter in Wawa. That's an admirable position. And frankly, you know what I mean? Like it beats the hell out of, being a stick-up man. But in the end, I wanted more for life. And I wanted to allege myself or be connected with other people that also had aspirations. The thing that always I felt that kind of hurt me in a way. I don't mean hurt me, but just kind of felt like is to fucking squander this thing. Right? I built castles in the sand my whole life because I never had a foundation that was sustainable, right? But then to finally get a foundation that's sustainable and not fucking build something on it. When I saw other people, I knew people who'd been clean for decades and they were like, yo, man, can I get $10? And I'd be like, yeah, sure. Why not? You know what I mean? Like there's no judgment behind it, but it just, in some ways I thought like what a fucking waste, right? Like what a waste. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm not saying everybody's got to be the master of the universe, but to take an opportunity to be able to grow and develop and build and change and do something new and impact others and all that other stuff, you know what I mean? And to stay in place and not do those things, like that, that always just felt to me, it hurt me to watch that, potential's just a fancy French word, means hasn't done shit yet. Right? You know what I mean? And I've always really felt like, watching squandered potential, and nothing gives you greater potential than when you're in a 12-step program and you build a foundation that you can build a fruitful, flourishing life. Right. And
meanwhile, you don't even know that's going to happen.
No, exactly.
Like you're there because the heat of that volcano is so hot.
So hot. Right.
And you got nowhere else. I had nowhere else to go, Jimmy.
No, me either.
I had already done some Anthony Robbins training prior to this.
Right.
I had read every Dr. Wayne Dyer book. Like
right.
My head was spinning.
Right.
How did this happen? Oh my God, what is all this? But I felt comfortable. I felt incredibly comfortable in that church basement.
Yeah.
Terrified that somebody on the outside world was going to see me walking in there.
Me too.
And I would go to multiple meetings a day.
Right.
And I think looking back, I was in like a state of psychosis because that's what marijuana will do.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And
paranoia too.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
Paranoia.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Not eating.
Right.
Right. You talk about the munchies. That's like social. When you get to the point where you're literally, it says in literature, you can't live with or without them.
Right.
And I didn't need to run like that for decades. Thankfully, for me, it was the pain came on so quickly.
Right.
I didn't switch to something heavier. It was just like, this is enough. I can't do this. I can't sustain this. But those rooms, I thought in some ways it was a death sentence. And I'm like, well, then how am I going to do this business if I need to do all these meetings? So I'm going to get my certificate and I'm going to be out.
Right.
But then thankfully those rooms had some people like you, not everybody, but that had that smile that you had. And that said, hey man, it's okay. And like actually that was helpful, right? Because you talk about the circles within the circle, which my interpretation is you kind of find some of your people.
Right.
And you don't need a lot of them. You just need a few good ones, which
Right.
was my perspective on
Right.
it. What I saw evolve is it changed my operating system. Like back to that, I like the computers and stuff. Literally, it began as I would allow it. That power greater than myself would start to rewrite my operating system.
Like a hard reset and a start from scratch. Right.
And man, I don't view it as almost like is it a hard reset and a start from scratch? For me, it's been an evolution over time.
Right.
It's still very much like if people were like, I still actively, my 12 steps has led me to like a spirituality that I feel very comfortable with,
Right.
that I can learn and contribute both the 12 steps, and then also I found like this yogic path.
Right.
And there, it says in the literature, more will be revealed. I feel that.
Right.
Because now these things that are actually my base reality were actually goals that I had from before.
Okay.
And I can be there in a way where I don't lust after it. Because if I did start to lust after these things, and I use a word like that, a close friend of mine named Jeff, he was taught on this thing called the release technique.
Right.
Basically, it goes through emotions. Apathy, lowest level of emotion.
Right.
Grief, fear, lust,
Right.
anger, pride. Then you get in higher level emotions of courageousness, acceptance, and peace. I have to be very careful in business and in life that I'm operating from courageousness, acceptance, and peace, and not from fear, pride, or any of those lower
Attachment.
level emotions.
Attachment. I get caught in attachment.
What does that mean to you?
Obsession, right? When I see an objective that I want to tackle, right, and I can't see it in a light that's that I can't see it from reality, right? Some of that, in some weird ways, is kind of like the fear. Like it's okay because attachment sometimes leads me to good things, and I end up experimenting or trying things or being creative about things that wouldn't ordinarily exist if it wasn't for the fact that I kind of felt that attachment. But the hard part is, it's like the third step. We made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him, and making a decision implies action, right? So we do the best we can to the best of our ability, but we let go of the results because that part we're not in control over, right? Well, the hard part is that when I'm trying to manifest a specific result, which is fine because that's the objective. In business, it's the objective. The challenge is when I'm unwilling to accept the result is not a manifestation that I initially set out as my goal.
Okay, got it.
Right?
So the attachment gives you focus.
Right.
Is what I just picked up. It gives you like a focus, but then you can sometimes get so focused that this bigger result that maybe isn't, you're hitting a goal and not hitting a result.
You said it before we got in here. We were standing out in the thing, and out in the entrance, and you were talking about, and we started the conversation off about the podcast that you had done for 58 episodes, right? Yep. And and then kind of a repositioning and then a refocus, and we've just November will complete 52 episodes of the Front Desk, Hotel Staff TV. And, and we've done it for a year, and, we've had some exposure. People are watching it all over the world, but at the same time, not with the level of traction and not with the level of intent, and not exactly. Now, you kind of have to do something the wrong way sometimes to reformulate and figure out, okay, here's what you need: a data set. Right? You know what I mean? A lot of times what I want to do is I want to position myself tactically without a data set. And it's really difficult to do. If you don't have the data, if you don't have a track record to go on, you don't know what to improve. So I was saying to Dean earlier today, we're actually starting to reformulate and change, it's a vision, mission, strategy tactics, right? You know what I mean? So the vision and the mission for what we're doing with that has not changed. The strategy has changed a modicum, but the tactics are starting to really shift pretty substantially. And the reason is because now we've got a data set to look at, okay, here's what we've done for a year. Here's what's been successful. And here, you know, here's what needs change. And here's what we can do differently. And, but I was thinking about something else, you know what I mean? Like I was thinking about, you know, you talked about, you know, one of those first books that I think your dad gave you, like Napoleon Hill.
Yeah,
right?
Uncle.
Right. Oh, Uncle. That's right. And thinking about like Think and Grow Rich was one of those seminal pieces of literature for a mindset for business, right? You know what I mean? Like I didn't, you know, my father would have been great in business, but didn't really have business being in business. You know what I mean? Like he had little side businesses, but he had difficulty in his own challenges, and he was, you know, eminently intelligent and very smart. And, but I looked at him and said, well, you know what I mean? You ought to be able to do better. Like that's a, you know, from an ego perspective. And I think many children, especially sons, look at their fathers and say, you know, I want to eclipse what my dad did because he don't know what he's doing. But I remember getting Think and Grow Rich, and there were a couple chapters I always skipped. Right?
Oh, is that right?
Yes. I treated with a minimum of concern. And the chapters I skipped were the chapters that I was unwilling to focus on. One chapter talked about a power greater than you.
Yeah, I don't even remember that being part of the book.
Yeah, it talks about, if you go back and look, you know what I mean? There's a part that talks about, you know, belief in a higher power, God, you know, really? God, right? And I was just like, well, I'm not going to go there, right? And the other part was about substance abuse.
Oh, really?
And I skipped that part too. You know what I mean? Because I was like, because those were parts I wasn't willing to engage in. You know what I mean? And then meanwhile, you know, if we looked at our success, our ability to navigate our way through life, I could never really get a grip on the climb. You know what I mean? It was like my hands were greased, right? You know what I mean? And frankly, you know, stopping using, you know, was kind of like taking the grease off my hands, but it really didn't address a deeper issue, which was the dis-ease that rested between my ears. So there was a lot of work to do. Right. But just stopping using. I remember my best friend telling me in my gift of desperation that like I was a garbage head. I used it all. And I had decided that I was going to go natural. I was just going to smoke chronic and drink. Right. That was like the end of my road. And I was thinking about putting a bullet in my head or jumping off the Ben Franklin Bridge, truthfully. You know what I mean? Like that was where, and I had met, you know, my current wife, and you know what I mean? And she had some experience and some background and could see some things I didn't. And one time I talked to my best friend in Texas. I had been estranged from him and his sister, because, you know, frankly, they were in the way of my using. And one day I was on my way into the city because I was trying to escape through success, right? You know what I mean? Like I didn't have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of, but I'm in a suit. I can't afford to take the subway anymore to the city. So I'm walking from, you know, 25, 30 city blocks in a suit and shoes to get to downtown Philly so I can do walk-ins with business cards. And I got my phone and I got my little Bluetooth earpiece, and I'm talking to my best friend in Texas that I served with in the Navy. And he said, well, now that the most important thing in your life is on the line, stopping using should be easy for you. He was talking about him and his sister. And that's when I got real bad. Because I hung up the phone and realized that I couldn't stop. You know what I mean? Like that was, you know what I mean? That he was right. The most important thing in my life. Yeah. We were talking about.
That volcano got hot and that
boy, didn't it though? You know what I mean? So we were talking about anonymity, you know what I mean? Which is a core principle of 12-step membership, right? So that we're in a fellowship where we, where there are no big I's, no little U's, right? You know, when we get there, anonymity means, you know, that we're equals once we walk through the doors. The challenge becomes trying to navigate your way through being a visible example of recovery while simultaneously navigating your way through concerns about how we're viewed by society at large, the stigma associated with addiction and recovery. And, and I always said, part of the reason why I was concerned about a breach of my anonymity was because there's a lot of trust associated with doing business. A lot of trust is given, with access to materials, organizations, people, et cetera. And that's, but I've just come to the point where it's like, what's more important, right? Being viewed in a way that's spotless and without flaw, or potentially saving somebody's life with the truth.
Right.
Right. And, I've noticed that, that I really feel that you can't do both. Right. And, there's a lack of authenticity to whitewashing, right? At least for me, my history, right? And I've found, at least in part, that through some of my largest clients, right, as they've gotten to know me on a more personal level, and we go out, for entertaining for business, right? And they're like, "Come on, let's go," you know what I mean? And I'm like, I buy them all drinks. Whatever, you know what I mean? But I've had several conversations with people where, they're in various stages of admission that they have a problem. And I'm one of the people that they talk to.
Yes.
It's because of the example that I show that, here I am going to places where everybody else is partying and I'm not, you know what I mean? They're like, hey, you know what I mean? So, I think this is important. I think that for us as business owners, right? And for those of us who've danced on the volcano and come out successfully on the other side to build flourishing lives that include the responsibility associated with these entities, right? Like that other people, you know what I mean? Like we bear all this weight.
Yeah.
It's disingenuous not to really share what our background is or where we came from. Yes. I think it serves to undermine what ultimately could save somebody's life. And that's what you said, when we shut the cameras off temporarily, but I wanted to kick back to that again. Have you noticed that in business and otherwise that there have been opportunities or situations where you've accessed people that might not have known about that there's another way?
I think the challenge is in today's culture, living clean.
We're losing that camera.
It's so against the grain of social norms right now that people almost can have this judgment that either you think that you're better than them because you're not having the beer around the campfire, right? Or that you're not as good as them for not having the wine at the dinner or whatever it may be, that I like a certain measure of transparency.
Right.
And otherwise, like you and me are both very authentic people. And I think that people will pick up on if we're not being authentic about something and say, well, what's up with that? Their innate ability as humans that we have this gut instinct.
Right.
So for me, I've just learned time and a place for everything. Early in, man, I wanted to shut my business down and just go to high schools and tell everybody how to get off drugs and alcohol and, all that. And my sponsor, was very good. And they said, dude, just one day at a time, man, and just keep focus on what's in front of you.
Right.
So it's definitely interesting. And I'm glad that we're having the discussion. From a business perspective, right, I own real estate.
Right.
I bring people along with me to invest in said real estate.
Right.
Many of my repeat investors know about my background. They've known me for 20 years.
Right.
They know me now as Rob. You actually alluded to that before. Like there was a period of time, it was that white knuckling period, I was not calm Rob. Employees, like, if they watch this, they'd be like, whoa, dude, who's that on that screen? He was not like that.
Right.
You know, post-college and before I, you know, hit my own rock bottom in a way.
Right.
And it wasn't drugs or alcohol. It was this dis-ease, this more money, property, prestige is going to make me feel better, and it never did. And I think that that's very much a human condition until I don't know what the solution that worked for me is a power greater than myself.
Right.
And belief and feeling part of. So, yes, Jimmy, it's not on my website.
Right.
But if somebody spent enough time with me,
right,
or wanted to get to know me,
right,
and what's nice is it's not really my identity anymore, because with enough time, I'm just focusing on my business when I'm on a business setting. This is what my management company can do for you, or here's what the investment company, this is what we do. And I'm vetting those potential clients as much as they're vetting me.
With enough distance. Right. That's really
with enough distance.
With enough distance.
With enough
right.
distance.
Yeah. Right. It's not, you know, at year 1 or year 2 or at year 1, it's, you know, I'm an art student, right? And I remember the first time I ate acid, my freshman year at University of the Arts, and I was like walking down the hallway, and I was like, "You're on acid. You're on acid. You're all on acid." And everybody was like, "No, dude, just a couple of you people are on acid. We're not on acid." I thought everybody was on acid, right? You know what I mean? And in recovery, you know, people tend to say sometimes that, you know, well, you know, everybody should have a 12-step process in their life, right? And my therapist one time at the VA said, you know, it would never work. And the reason why is because without desperation, you wouldn't have a need for the 12 steps, right? You know what I mean? And I thought to myself, like, what a gift. You know, my favorite place is up there on the edge, right? You know what I mean? Because it led me to change, you know, and
your favorite place that you don't want to walk back up to?
No, absolutely not. No, I'm never ever going to be up there again. You know what I mean? Just for today. It has nothing to do with God willing. It has to do with the decision I make just for today to not use no matter what. And to live the process of the 12 steps to the best of my ability. You know what I mean? And I do it well some days and poorly others, but I don't use no matter what. And, you know, and this has just been a really enlightening experience because once again, like when we talked about before we started, you know what I mean? Like the ability to be able to unpack, you know what I mean? Like what I find compelling is these conversations with people that have stood on the edge of the volcano, come out on the other side, you know what I mean? And to really dance in it afterwards is really about what you do with it, right? And if you don't inspire, what the fuck are we doing? Right? If we don't inspire, what are we doing? You know, there is no power greater than encouragement, right? And I think the sad thing sometimes is that, you know, in an interest of trying to protect this this avatar of who we are, and missing that authenticity, we really don't get the opportunity to share the message to others what's really possible. You know, stop clean, lose the desire to use, find a new way to live, all those things. But in the finding the new way to live is the freedom. You know what I mean? And what you can really do with it, right? You know, I'm fucking honored and privileged to be your friend. I love you.
Love you too, brother.
And you know, oh, so we have a new thing. We've been doing this for, you know, this is episode number 3. So hang on one second, and I'll tell you what this is. So what we're doing is every person that we interview, right? We ask them a question, and the question we ask is to share a question for the next person on the podcast, right? So, so this has been a running thing, and you know we act like it's been running forever, only that we're only a couple episodes. So,
episode 2 asked a question.
Yes.
Or posed the question.
And this one's yours. This one's yours. And then you don't have to give me a question, but later on after it percolates, you can text me one, and it'll be waiting for, actually Thursday's my next one. We're doing 2 this week. So when have you done something for someone without expecting anything in return, and how? thought that was a pretty good one, actually.
Tricky. That's a, can you, I would really have to give that some thought.
Okay.
Because even the other day, there's a homeless man in Westchester.
Okay.
There's a few homeless people in Westchester, not many. The one my daughter and I tried to give a breakfast sandwich to.
Okay.
And this person was a little snippy with us and told us, well, stand over there, and, and I could tell I didn't get them the right breakfast sandwich. Okay. And then there was another one that I'm driving down the street, and I see this man. And if you live in Westchester, you know this man because he's pushing all the time. He's pushing shopping carts, and he has bags overflowing, and there's cans in there, so he's recycling them to earn money. And I rolled down my window, and I gave him a bottle of water and a breakfast sandwich, and you would have thought that I gave him $1 million.
Right.
So then I see him the other day, and I'm walking I take walks multiple times a day in my offices in the borough. And I look at my wallet. I was going to give him a couple dollars, and all I had was a $100 bill. Without even thinking twice about it, I folded it up and handed it to the man. Did I do that completely unselfishly? I don't know. I didn't share it with anybody. I didn't tell my kids. I didn't post it on social media.
Right.
I'm sharing it with you now because it's the first thing that came up. What was your question again?
Well, when was the last time?
When was the last time you did something like
When was the last time you did something for someone without expecting anything in return?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's what came up for me.
So I think your answer is actually really cool, right? Because I have this conversation with people all the time, where I say it's not a conversation of answers; it's a conversation of questions. And sometimes, a thoughtful question leads to a different framing of or perspective change in. Like, in other words, would you really look at the expectation of some return result from your kindness, or would it just pass as unexplored? Right? You know what I mean? And it's funny how the 12-step process continues to unpeel and evolve, and I continue to hear things or little passages or little phrases or little turn of phrase or words that for whatever reason didn't titillate or didn't excite me or didn't stick out to me before. And one of them was something that I read recently, and it was the dangers of living an unexamined life. And I thought, yeah, man, like I can just run on my own juice and not really deeply think about my actions or my expectations or the consequences of my decisions or my perspective and all those other things. And questions like that are kick ass because not necessarily having a canned answer, but rather a reflection of what does this really mean, and how do I, how does my kindness, what is my expectation of my kind? Because I'm here to tell you, like, if you posed the same question at me, I'd be dancing on the hot seat too, because I do give of myself, right? Pretty regularly, but do I give of myself without expectation of anything in return? That's a.
I didn't give the $100 to that person who wasn't grateful with the thing. I gave it to the man who I knew would give me a smile back. Right, exactly. And subconsciously, there's probably something in me.
Fuck you, can guy. You ain't good shit.
No, the can guy got it.
No, the can guy got
it.
I
didn't give it to
the other dude, right?
Probably wouldn't right now. I mean, I think what that question's bringing up is, we talk about the 12 steps a lot in this episode,
right?
And that led me to this yogic path.
Right.
And that's led me to understand more roots of how I was raised with a certain religion. And there, in one of these major religions, there's this man on this cross. Right. And one of his famous lines is, as he's up there, right. going to die, bless them, Father, they know not what they do.
Right.
So that was the first scenario that came up for me, but there's multiple levels.
Right.
And I'd like to almost just do a disclaimer on this interview.
Right.
Because I want to continue to raise through those levels of consciousness.
Right.
I respect where I'm at right now.
Right.
And I know that there's a lifetime ahead.
Right.
And I'm excited for that journey, and I'm excited to, share it with you, my brother.
Right.
And I'll have to give some thought as to what that next. I think that's a good question for the next guest as well. But if we need an original one, I can. I can. But yeah,
I'll just keep putting everybody on the spot with the same question. You know what I mean? Like, he fired that one at me. When I heard it, I was like, ooh.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, because it brings up for me unconditional love, which unless you are, for me, I've learned that being a parent, where it's much easier. 4 children, all with different, the youngest with the Down syndrome, the oldest with the straight A's, and the amount of unconditional love that I can be challenged with, not from my youngest, but from my oldest, is really, that's a gift that she gives me, quite frequently.
Right.
And it's very much a challenge. So, life is full of these things. And when you get to the edge of that volcano, and look, some people, and sadly, they go over and they burn up, and other people come back. I know what gift I'm going to give you, my friend. It's a picture called The Path.
Okay.
And it's about when you get to that highest level of consciousness.
Right.
And you could stay there. And in a way, you do stay there, but you go back to help those behind you. That's what I'd like to just set this episode down with. Like, hopefully no ego, and just like pass it on to the next person. And I also hope that it's never used against us, that the context is taken out of context.
We don't have any control over that.
There's a level of powerless when you get vulnerable and you share. It's actually, vulnerability is one of my company values. Right. So have no choice, but you've created a safe environment here. And, it's a pleasure being here. And that's whoever left that question it's a good question.
Right. Well, give me a solid fist pound, my brother, because I fucking love you. You know what I mean? And that was fantastic. And, it's an honor and a privilege to dance on the volcano with you, my brother. And, I certainly intend to, have repeat people on the show. So, it may be a while till we get back to this again. But, some of the people that I admire that have longstanding podcasts have had some regular players on their show for quite some time. So it might even we've got 2 more mics. So we might do a 3 or 4. I'm built for Zoom so we can bring in people. You know what I mean? Like it's, we built this for the intent that we didn't exactly know where it was going. So we built it to scale, expand, and do some fun things with. So I fucking love you, brother. Thank you so much. I appreciate you coming out.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks for dancing on the volcano, my brother.
Absolutely.
All right.